Hello, students. Good morning, all of you. Today, I, Ravindra Mohan Mishra from Sri Jagdamba Sanskrit College, Batho, am taking the class of Shastri first. Today, we read about the narrative technique of the poem on his blindness. We have seen critical appreciation of the poem and also the explanation of the poem. For the coming examination, as our examination is very near, today's question and answer narrative technique of the poem on his blindness is very important. So we learn by unanimous consent on his blindness is Milton's best sonnet, in which English poetic art attains a sublime height. Actually, it is not a mere poem only, it is the inner voice of a man who has resigned himself entirely to the will of God and depends only on His mercy and justice. In this poem, the poet John Milton explores his experiences with blindness and religious faith. The poem takes the form of a Petrarchan sonnet, which traditionally focuses on love and romance. But Milton subverts this in order to explore his relationship with God. Milton fears that his blindness will prevent him from doing God's will or work. The personification of patience tells him that even his blindness is useful to God if he continues to have faith. John Milton's poem on his blindness is an autobiographical sonnet in which Milton meditates on his own loss of sight. For most of his life, Milton had been able to see perfectly, but his late night reading and writing on behalf of the government of the short lived English Republic, in which he held a very prominent position, helped ruin his eyesight. The idea of losing one's sight is obviously a deeply troubling one. The blind person is suddenly at risk in all kinds of ways. He can no longer literally see his own way or easily protect himself from dangers. The special tragedy of this particular speaker is that he has lost his sight at an unusually early stage of life. Rather than becoming blind when elderly, he has become blind in middle age. He, he now inhabits a world that seems dark in at last two senses. Firstly, it is no longer physically visible, and secondly, it is a world full of sin and spiritual darkness. The world, moreover, is not only dark but also white. The speaker will somehow have to navigate both literally and figuratively in a world which because of its width or breadth will pose many dangers. If the speaker were confined to a single dark room, he might quickly and easily learn his way around the sphere. Again, we say Milton's On His Blindness is an Italian sonnet written in the first person. This sonnet, written in Petrarchan rhyme scheme, associated with the 14th century Italian poet Francesco Petrarch. It is divided into a 8-line octave and a 6-line sestet. The octet rhymes ABBA, ABBA. The sestet rhymes CDA, CDA. The sonnet is therefore a typical Petrarchan sonnet in form, but in subject matter, the poem departs from the topic usually associated with Petrarchan poem. On his blindness is written in the first person. Therefore, it is easy to assume that the speaker is the poet himself. By beginning line 1 with the word when, Milton immediately signals that he is opening with a subordinate clause that introduces the main idea to follow. Beginning the poem this way creates a certain suspense. The main idea is postponed so that we have to continue reading in anticipation of its eventual arrival. By opening with a dependent clause, Milton heightens our sense of anticipation by delaying the key statement. The word consider implies careful, rational thought rather than purely emotional reaction. Here and throughout the poem, the speaker uses his reason, which Renaissance Christians considered one of the greatest gifts that God had bestowed upon human beings. The ability of humans to reason, they believed, linked them to God and distinguished them from animals. The speaker feels that his light is spent in several senses of the word light. This word clearly alludes, at least eventually, to the speaker's loss of sight, but light may also suggest one's intelligence. The opening line may at first seem to mean, when I think about how I have used my intelligence, but it soon comes to mean, when I ponder how my ability to see has become extinguished. This latter meaning is, of course, foreshadowed by the poem's title. The tone of patience and humility has perfectly mingled with that of great dignity. The poem is a human document, a revelation of the struggle in Milton's own soul. It starts with a note of regret, then there is a mood of doubt and questioning, which, however, melts in the final attitude of complete resignation. The beauty and exaltation of moral feeling raise the poem to a great height. The poem is full of allusions to the Bible. As the sonnet bears Italian structure, so it proves clearly that Milton's faith in God is unshakable. It is sonnet which touches the poet personally. The sonnet tells us that Milton became blind when he had run only half the race of his life. He was broken down with grief, disappointment, and despair. His only hope was his faith in the mercy, kindness, and justice of God. The poem gives us a glimpse of Milton's philosophy of life. The sonnet is replete with abundant pathos. It reflects the personal grief and despair of a poet of Milton's eminence. The poet was unknown to possess a noble and lofty character, and his conduct was akin to his nature and temperament. He therefore does not lose heart or weep like an ordinary man. He endures suffering with fortitude and bears the loss of his eyesight in a courageous and manly way. Incidentally, the sonnet shows an age old question. The problem is, does God require the service of man? Milton implies patience to solve this riddle. The answer is that those who resign themselves unquestioningly to the will and wishes of God are his best servants. This idea is repeated with ample emphasis twice in the sonnet. Like the outstanding characteristic of all great and good poetry, this sonnet has universal appeal. Far from being a mere poem, it is barely a divine message of the afflicted people of the world to mankind as a whole that has unbounded faith in God's mercy and generosity.